So it's important to understand that opposition to climate action didn't start in 2006-07, that there's a very long history of opposition to even carbon pricing. The people who came up with carbon pricing, you have to look back to the late 1980s, and in 1989 the science minister of the day, Barry Jones, mooted it as a possibility. There were also reports from within the Treasury Department saying this would be one way to deal with the problem. By the time the issue of a carbon tax came onto the agenda in sort of 1990-91 as part of this thing called the Ecologically Sustainable Development process, the opposition to it started to grow as well. And you started to see reports produced by economists who were being paid by coal companies to say that the sky would fall if there were a carbon tax, that the hundreds and thousands of jobs would be at risk, that export earnings would collapse, that we'd all be basically living in caves and chewing lentils, and that this would be the deindustrialisation of Australia and the collapse of its economy. And these reports got prominence in certain newspapers, especially The Australian, and by early 1992 the idea of a carbon tax had been successfully defeated. It came back onto the agenda in 94-95, and this was the first success of something called the Australian Industry Greenhouse Network, which was initially a combination of people from the Business Council of Australia, which is the elite body for big business, and what was then called the Australian Mining Industry Council, which has since changed its name. And they basically donated office space and personnel, and they created the Australian Industry Greenhouse Network, which was instrumental in defeating the proposal for a carbon tax that was put forward by the Environment Minister John Faulkner in 1994-95. You should add that the environmentalists didn't exactly play their hand well, but I think it was always going to end the way that it did. From there, John Howard, who was the Australian Prime Minister from March 1996 until November 2007, was able to suppress all moves towards a carbon price. He grudgingly had to allow a mandatory renewable energy target, which finally came into force in 2001, but even that he wanted to scupper, and there's an infamous meeting, the minutes were leaked, that's how we know about it, where he got big business around the table and said, look, you have to help me kill this thing. This was in 2004. So most people know already about the long battles over carbon pricing from 2006 onwards, and it has claimed multiple political careers, including Kevin Rudd's, Julia Gillard's, Malcolm Turnbull's, and it all sort of dates to December 1st, 2009, when Tony Abbott became leader of the Liberal Party by a single vote, became leader of the opposition, overthrew the bipartisan consensus on climate change. And since then it has been chaos and mayhem, and the possibilities of finding any sort of acceptable to everyone compromise just out the window. So on the right wing parties, the Liberals and the Nationals, are having to shore up their electoral support because they're being attacked by Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party, which is riddled with climate deniers. Labour is having to shore up its support from the Green Party, which has a couple of one member of Parliament federally and a bunch of senators. And it's also become a culture war, where it becomes an article of faith whether you accept climate change or not. Oddly, the people most affected by climate change, who are getting hit already, the farmers, have only relatively recently started going, hey look, this National Party that is supposed to be representing us is actually representing the miners and what we call the big end of town.